The story begins with 5 college students taking advantage of the weekend break to plan an outdoor adventure together. Once everyone arrived, they set off in their car. Their destination was in a very remote area, so much so that even the GPS couldn't locate it. They were all excited about the trip, unaware that their nightmare was about to begin. The car continued down a mountain trail and soon entered a tunnel carved into the cliffside. As they drove into the tunnel, an eagle suddenly flew toward them, but in the next moment, it hit an invisible wall and plummeted into the abyss. The passengers in the car didn't see this strange and eerie event and were unaffected. Smoothly passing through the tunnel, the car continued deeper into the mountains. Before long, they finally reached their destination. It was an abandoned cabin deep in the woods. The surroundings looked eerie and terrifying, and the inside had an indescribable, strange atmosphere. However, none of them were afraid, and instead, they seemed unusually excited. They each picked a room, but when Holden entered his room, he saw a bizarre painting hanging on the wall. It depicted several grotesque figures cruelly devouring a wild deer. Holden felt uneasy, so he quickly took down the painting, only to discover that there was a mirror behind it. It turned out to be a one-way mirror, allowing Holden to see into Dana's room, while Dana was unaware of it. Having secretly admired Dana for a long time, Holden didn't immediately warn her. It wasn't until she began undressing that he hesitated and knocked on the wall. Mirrors in rooms weren't unusual, but a one-way mirror was rare. These mirrors were typically used in interrogation rooms. The others didn't think much of it. Though Dana felt some unease, Holden noticed her concern and offered to switch rooms with her. This action increased Dana's affection for Holden, and the sight of his well-defined abs made her heart race. She quickly hung the painting back on the wall. However, the content of the painting was disturbing, so she covered it with a blanket. As the camera pulled away, their every move was being captured on surveillance footage. Unbeknownst to them, everything in the cabin was being broadcast live. The group was completely unaware, still frolicking by the lake next to the cabin. Little did they know, the happiness they felt in that moment would soon be overshadowed by the brutal fate awaiting them. That night, the 5 of them were having a blast in the cabin, playing truth or dare. Jules was the first to take a dare. She chose the dare option, and Marty dared her to get intimate with the wolf head mounted on the wall. Without hesitation, Jules strutted up to the wolf head and completed the task effortlessly. Afterward, she seemed unsatisfied, leaving everyone stunned. Next, it was Dana's turn. She also chose a dare, but just as she spoke, the cellar door suddenly opened, startling everyone. They thought it was the wind, and, curious about what might be inside, they asked Dana to go down and check, claiming it was her dare task. Dana had no choice but to enter the cellar. With the weak light of a flashlight, she saw several odd figurines. When the light shone on a photo of a girl, Dana was immediately terrified and screamed. Her friends rushed down to check on her, and Kurt even said she had cried for help. So the dare was considered failed. Meanwhile, Marty lit an oil lamp. As the cellar was illuminated, everyone was shocked by what they saw. The items seemed ancient and numerous. If it were just a collection, it would be incredibly strange. Although they were all scared, they couldn't resist picking up a few items to examine them more closely. Back at a nearby base, a mysterious organization had begun placing bets. Their targets were the 5 friends, and the outcome of the bets depended on the objects in the cellar. Each object represented a different terrifying monster, and if any item was activated, the corresponding monster would hunt them down. The person who bet on the correct object would win all the stakes. In other words, their choices also determined their method of death. At that moment, Dana, holding a diary, called everyone over and began reading its contents aloud. The disturbing story made Marty uncomfortable, and he asked Dana to stop immediately, but it was as if she had been possessed, and she couldn't stop reading. Little did they know, the terrifying creatures in the forest had already been awakened. As the zombies broke out of the ground, some in the base were excited, while others were filled with worry. It turned out that the diary was linked to a family of zombies from a rural massacre, and the person who bet on the diary had won all the stakes. Meanwhile, the people inside the cabin were still dancing and having fun, completely unaware that danger was fast approaching. Watching Jules' sexy and fiery figure, Kurt couldn't hold back any longer and dragged her out of the cabin, heading for a small forest outside. However, with the surroundings completely dark, Jules started to feel scared. Little did they know, their intimate actions were being broadcast live, with a group of people gathered around the monitor, eagerly awaiting the spectacle. To ensure everything went smoothly, the staff even released smoke to cover them. Under the influence of drugs, Jules, who had initially resisted, instantly fell into the mood. But the next moment, Kurt was tackled by a zombie. He tried to check on Jules' injuries, but was stabbed by another zombie that caught up with him. After struggling to land a few punches and knock the zombie down, Kurt painfully pulled the knife from his back, only for another zombie to emerge. Seeing this, Kurt tried to escape but was instantly taken down by a trap set by the zombies. The zombies then threw a snare trap at Jules, pulling her violently towards them. Hearing his girlfriend's cries for help, Kurt struggled to get up from the ground, only to be grabbed tightly by another zombie. Meanwhile, 2 other zombies cruelly sawed his girlfriend in half right in front of him. This gruesome scene was too much for the staff watching the monitors, one of whom pulled a switch. As massive gears started to turn, Jules' blood slowly filled a statue, seemingly part of some mysterious ritual. Meanwhile, Marty stepped outside to get some air. He looked up at the sky but couldn't see a single star. Feeling puzzled, Marty thought it was strange that, despite the clear skies during the day, he didn't notice a figure slowly approaching him from behind. The next second, both he and Kurt were startled by a horde of zombies, and they quickly ran inside, slamming the door shut. Seeing Kurt covered in blood, Dana rushed over to ask what had happened, and Kurt, with a look of sorrow, could only say that Jules was dead. Kurt had no time to explain and insisted they had to leave immediately, but Dana didn't believe him and ignored the warnings as she opened the door. To her horror, a zombie stood at the doorway, holding Jules' severed head in its hands. Realizing the danger, Kurt rushed over to close the door, and the others quickly joined in to help. Together, they managed to keep the zombie outside. However, the zombies weren't giving up and began relentlessly banging on the door. Dana quickly recognized the zombies by their appearance. They were the very same ones described in the diary. In a panic, the group scattered to their respective rooms, unaware that every move they made was part of the mysterious organization's plan. Just then, a noise came from outside, and Marty hurried over to close the window, but accidentally knocked over a lamp on the table. This led him to discover a hidden camera inside the lamp. Realizing the situation was dire, the controller was about to release a sedative to make Marty sleep, but then noticed a zombie approaching Marty. They decided to hand him over to the zombie. Marty, still in disbelief, thought they were just filming a reality show, but the next second, the zombie grabbed him and pulled him out of the window. Marty quickly rolled over to dodge a stabbing knife, then used a water glass to knock the zombie down. As he turned to run, he was struck by a flying knife, hitting him with deadly precision. The zombie dragged him deep into the forest, and after a loud scream, Marty's blood-filled statue was also completed. Soon, Dana's room was also invaded. Not knowing what to do, she broke the one-way mirror with a lamp, managing to escape to her room. She then moved a bed to block the gap, only to find a hidden trapdoor under the bed. With no way out, the two of them had no choice but to risk hiding inside. It appeared to be a torture chamber, filled with a terrifying array of instruments. The sight sent chills down their spines, and they quickly started searching for an escape route. Just then, the zombie threw out a snare trap, catching Holden and pulling him up. Dana rushed over to help pull Holden down, then grabbed a crowbar to stab at the zombie. Before they could recover from the shock, the door behind them suddenly opened. It was Kurt, who had found his way to the basement, leading them outside. The three of them rushed to the car, but they didn't notice the bloody handprints on the car door. And how could the mysterious organization let them leave so easily? Bombs had already been planted on the road they would take, and as soon as the car entered the tunnel, an explosion went off. Fortunately, Kurt quickly put the car in reverse before the tunnel completely collapsed, saving them from being buried alive. At this point, the three of them were completely stunned. How had everything turned out like this? Realizing the cliff ahead wasn't too far, Kurt decided to ride a motorcycle and fly over. As an excellent extreme sports enthusiast, he was confident he could cover this distance and promised to bring someone back to rescue them. After saying goodbye to the two, Kurt rode his motorcycle, speeding up and heading straight toward the cliff. Watching Kurt fall into the abyss, both of them felt their hearts drop. They also realized that some mysterious force was controlling everything. Meanwhile, back at the base, Kurt's statue was filled with blood. Now, only Holden and Dana's hope of escape remained, but it was shattered. He had to lead Dana back to the forest cabin, trying to find another way out, but Dana said all their efforts were in vain. She was certain that other accidents would occur, and they would never be able to leave. Holden comforted her, promising to take her out, but before he could finish, a hidden zombie in the car stabbed him, and the car immediately lost control, falling into the lake. Although Dana miraculously survived, as she climbed to the shore, she was immediately targeted by the zombie. Watching as the last one, Dana, was grabbed by the zombie. They knew the ritual would be completed once all 5 died. People in the base had already opened champagne to celebrate, as this meant their task for the year was complete. They could now relax until next year's ritual began. At the same time, such rituals were being performed all over the world. While the methods differed, the goal was the same: to use human lives for sacrifice. However, before they could celebrate, the red phone in the monitoring room suddenly rang, which silenced everyone instantly. The person in charge nervously answered the phone and discovered it was from their superior. They were warned not to celebrate too early because the ritual wasn't finished. There was still one person alive. Aside from Dana, everyone looked at the monitor in confusion and saw the zombie preparing to execute Dana. Unexpectedly, at the critical moment, Marty, who had been dragged away by the zombie, suddenly appeared, striking the zombie down. To their surprise, the surviving person was Marty. As they spoke, the zombie rose again, but Dana grabbed a piece of wood and knocked it into the water. Seizing the opportunity, they hurriedly ran toward the cabin. Under Marty's lead, the two of them made their way into the graveyard. It turned out that when Marty was dragged into the grave, he used a shovel to execute a counterattack and discovered a hidden passage. Beneath the grave was an elevator, clearly placed there by someone. Determined to uncover the truth, the two bravely jumped into the elevator. With a slight jolt, the elevator began moving downward. Once it reached a certain depth, it changed direction and began to move horizontally. Though it was pitch black, and they couldn't see anything, the two felt that something was wrong. Just as Dana leaned closer to the glass to examine it, a werewolf suddenly appeared, startling both of them. Little did they know, even more terrifying things lay ahead. As the elevator continued, they saw even more horrible creatures. Finally, when they saw the Hell Lord holding a spherical object, Dana realized that everything had been carefully planned. Furious, Dana pounded on the glass, confused as to why it had to be them, and why they were to die. As the camera zoomed out, the entire base and all its monsters came into view. The two senior executives had never encountered a situation where the sacrificial offerings fought back. To ensure the ritual continued, they had to send in the base's security personnel to intervene. Following the sacrificial order, they had to kill Marty first and Dana last. Soon, a security guard arrived at the glass room where the two were, but Dana stood in front of Marty. The guard threatened Dana to step out of the room, but just then, Marty's zombie grabbed the guard's leg. Taking advantage of the distraction, the two seized the chance to counterattack, picked up the weapons on the ground, and escaped. At that moment, a woman's voice came over the intercom, saying their goal was to appease the ancient monsters, and that their existence was to be sacrificed as offerings. After hearing this, the two realized the gravity of the situation. They quickly ran into a nearby control room, but their location was soon exposed, and a large group of security personnel rushed in. In a moment of crisis, Dana noticed a button on the control panel, glanced at the creatures in the monitor, and immediately understood what to do. Dana pressed the button, releasing all the monsters. The fully armed security team was immediately slaughtered by the monsters. The entire base descended into chaos, with various monstrous creatures rampaging and a series of bloody scenes playing out. Like a hellish nightmare, in such a situation, committing suicide with a gun might have been the most dignified way to die. As the various areas fell one by one, the head of security called for more reinforcements, but the disaster had already spiraled beyond their control, and even the monitoring room was no longer safe. Several scarecrows broke through the door, throwing the monitoring room into disarray. At the same time, a giant bat suddenly flew into the control room, sending Dana and Marty fleeing in panic. Looking at the incredibly tragic scene around them, they finally realized the severity of the consequences. Seeing a large group of zombies closing in, the two could only hide in a nearby wall crevice, while the bloody and horrific slaughter continued without pause. Meanwhile, on the other side, the man had barely escaped from the monitoring room when he bumped into Dana. Both of them were stabbed in the abdomen by the knife in Dana's hand. Before dying, he begged Dana to complete the trap, not allowing human civilization to be destroyed. As they fled, the two accidentally stumbled upon the altar. They were horrified to discover that the 5 statues on the wall corresponded exactly to the 5 of them. Dana finally believed that the sacrificial ritual was real. Suddenly, a familiar voice echoed in their ears. It was the woman who had spoken over the intercom earlier. She was the mastermind behind the ritual. To ensure they became the sacrificial offerings, the woman revealed the truth to them. It turned out that the 5 of them hadn't been randomly chosen. They were selected from a group of carefully picked young people who met the sacrificial criteria: a sexy woman, an athlete, a scholar, a fool, and an innocent woman. Each of them was essential, and the order of the sacrifice couldn't be disrupted. If it was, the ritual would fail. If the ritual failed, the evil god, buried underground, would awaken and bring about the destruction of the world. In other words, Dana's and Marty's lives were tied to the survival of humanity. Despite this, Marty still refused to sacrifice himself. The deaths of the others meant nothing to him. Little did he know, Dana had slowly raised her gun to save the world. She made her choice. Marty slowly turned around, staring at Dana in disbelief, begging her to spare him, but Dana had made up her mind. She was about to pull the trigger when suddenly, a monster attacked her from behind. Dana's gun fell to the ground, and Marty fought the woman. He punched her down, grabbed the gun, and fired several shots at the monster, saving Dana from the brink of death. However, he was ambushed by the woman, and they struggled once more. Meanwhile, severely injured Dana saw something terrifying. A zombie with an axe was slowly advancing toward them. At Dana's warning, Marty noticed the approaching zombie and deliberately allowed the woman to pin him down. As the woman grabbed the gun and prepared to kill Marty, the zombie swung its axe, striking her in the head. This zombie was the female zombie they had summoned at the start. Having narrowly escaped, Marty kicked both the woman and the zombie into the abyss. Just then, the ground began to shake violently. Marty realized that the sun was about to rise, so he slowly walked over to Dana's side, lit a cigarette, and prepared to face the judgment of fate. At this moment, Dana also found peace. Humans had made the world so terrible, maybe letting the monsters rule for a while wouldn't be such a bad thing. The next second, the entire base shook violently again. In the last moment of their lives, the two held hands as a massive hand burst from the ground.